I've been looking forward to this salon, and I compliment you in the CHE in Holland and Auge and Leide for setting up this salon. It goes back many, many hundreds of years when they did these salons of discussions among people with common interest. And we, I guess, assume most of the people here have a strong interest in spy dynamics and of course, in what's happening around us. I will do my utmost to present and discuss the questions that Auge raised to me. And I would welcome suggestions and proposals to some of the things I'm going to present. There will probably be a couple of tough discussion points regarding a couple of the topics here that I will present and try to document, because I have done a thorough analysis of the topics: immigration, the question about Sweden and Finland into NATO, and of course my favorite topic, that most of you who knows me, my favorite topic is, do we see signs of second tier at all? And most of the people who knows me know also that I'm kind of skeptical. I'm questioning whether we see a yellow or how much yellow we see, although that is what is needed for today's life conditions, the complexity of today's life conditions that will require going forward second tier leadership. Now, I'm coming from the area we call Nordic, and all of us, I guess, assume that the Nordic countries are having a strong center of gravity in the green mean. And I have actually, due to this session here, been looking further into the history. Why did the Nordic countries evolve or develop to the stage that the countries are in today? And I found some actually new information, some interesting information. But with this, I will try and get my presentation up. Just a second. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
It's okay?
Yes.
Everybody can see it?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Let me then begin by sending some warm thanks and memory thanks and thoughts to these two gentlemen, to Professor Claire Graves and to Don Beck, without whom we wouldn't sit and have this session here or this salon. And I just want to acknowledge the enormous impact they have had on so many people. At least I have had so much great and so many great experiences with the spy dynamics, which actually, for the first time I met Don, it changed my way of looking at things. It changed my way of approaching things. So I am extremely happy that I got this opportunity. So here is what I'm going to cover, and I'm going to dump a lot of stuff on you. Bear with me, okay? But point number two, setting the stage. I will provide some basic facts about the Nordic countries. As I said before, a brief historical view. Why and how did the Nordic countries develop as they did? How did they get to, if I may, the green mean? So, and we're going to look at the world value survey that most of you probably have seen before, but that in a nice way highlight why Nordic countries have come to the point where they are today. Then I'm going to look at some similarities and differences between the Nordic countries. And I hope that Lars, he will join in here and help me. If not here, then in the Q&A session. And I would then continue into a hot topic, I guess, not only in Denmark, I guess throughout Europe. And that's the question about immigration, where I'm going to provide a mimetic analysis that I'm sure you all can relate to with the background you have. Then I'm going to discuss, at the request of Auke, the topic of Sweden and Finland in NATO. And as all of you probably know, there are some challenges, especially for Sweden, since Finland is already on board, became a member in April of this year. And last point, the discussion on the next mimetic states for the Nordic countries. Will we see a progression, regression, or stagnation? Or do I personally see signs of second tier in the Nordic countries? I do see some small signs, just to disclose one of my conclusions here. But what I'm going to do on the next slide is basically give you the conclusions on my presentation. They are here. Key factors behind the actual mimetic center of gravity in the Nordic countries, they are Lutheranism, philosophical trends in the Enlightenment period, and a topic, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, the topic of Bildung. And that actually was something that became much more clear to me during my preparation for this session here. Second conclusion on immigration. We see immigration from primarily purple-red center of gravity countries into the Nordic, which is, of course, center of gravity green. And it's a major challenge, a growing challenge for the social cohesion of the Nordic, among the Nordic populations. And I've seen a growing polarization. And let me just say here that my take on this one is that we have not had the necessary leadership in place over the last, say, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even years to deal with that complexity. Oh, I would have wished that the Nordic prime ministers and other ministers have had kind of a session on spiral dynamics to understand how the various memes play together. That would have helped a lot. Well, Sweden and Finland, as I mentioned, again there, the conclusion is, seen from my chair at least, is that the membership application to become a member of NATO is simply driven by growing concerns about the national security, because both countries have borders to Russia, and then also on a more individual level, or you can say societal level, existential survival threats among people. And that is, and here's my conclusion, not surprise to any of you, I'm sure, but that's what's happening, I believe. We see a strong mimetic regression to the purple-blue, the purple and blue value mean. Last conclusion, and then we are basically done. I know I will review a lot of data with you. Signs of second tier in the Nordic countries. My take is I see few, although they are badly needed. And then I have a question for you for the breakout sessions. And that is a thing that I'm actually really digging into and considering whether the significant growth in what I call, or we call, individualism is a small sign of yellow. We definitely have a use today, which is much more focused on world-centric or systemic challenges to humanity, and life conditions are more complex than they have ever been. But the question is, are they bad or severe enough to force emerging yellow? So this is basically the conclusion. If time runs out, you have had the conclusions. Now, some basic fact about the Nordic, and I'm going to go pretty fast forward because I assume that most of you know, but this is the geography of the Nordic countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland up to the left. And you can see the countries surrounding. And if you look to the right, you see Russia there. And of course, the borders of Finland to Russia is long. And that is also one of the, I guess, factors behind the interest of becoming a member of NATO. Now, if you look at the Nordic countries, We are a total of approximately 27 million people. If you look at the Nordic countries, the 5 Nordic countries as one country, we would be the 55th largest country by population. It's not big. We would be the 20th largest country in terms of land area, primarily due to, I guess, Greenland, Sweden, Norway, and then we would be the 10th largest economy in the world by the GDP. Just here for your information, these are some of the brands that I'm sure most of you again have seen. IKEA, Lego, Carlsberg, Kone, the elevators. Equinor is the largest Norwegian Statoil, former Statoil company, oil exporting company. Norway have a lot of fishery to the right there, and the same goes for Iceland, tourism and fishery. And then there have been a lot of writing about the Nordic countries, and I've just put up some titles here that most of them you will meet in when you walk into the bookstore in the airport. You see a lot of interest in writing about the Nordic countries. Up to the left, they're almost nearly perfect people. I can guarantee we are not perfect, but there's a lot of interest for the topics of lykke, coziness, I would claim it. And on the next page, we have the latest recent books about the Nordics as such. As Auke mentioned, the Biodynamics in Action in the middle. And then I can strongly recommend, and I know it has been translated into Ukrainian by Katarina, The Nordic Secret, written by Lena and Thomas, Lena Andersen and Thomas Björkman. And I'm actually have a meeting with Lena on next Monday. And then there's a book of Return of the Vikings. And then on to the next, just examples, don't go into detail here. But we have actually some extremely interesting documentation and writings about why the Nordic countries evolved or developed as they did. You can see there in the middle, upper middle, there Lutheranism and the Nordic spirit of social democracy, which we will come back to in more detail in a second. Because in the bottom, you see there is the bottom right book is Different Paths to Modernity. And the interesting subtext that you cannot see, that's a comparison between Sweden and Spain, because Sweden and Spain both had many similarities, but one major difference that I will cover in a second. So in this book about the difference between Sweden and Spain, which will lead to one of my conclusions, that you don't need to read all the text. You could just read what's in the red squares. And I read it loud now. It says, in religion, Sweden was one of the bulwarks of Protestantism, Spain of Roman Catholicism. The religious heritage had important repercussions in both cases. For Sweden, it turned out to have an unexpected dividend. Protestant insistence upon the individual reading of the Bible favored an accumulation of human capital that the intellectual authoritarianism of the Catholic Church discouraged. This difference may be the most trenchant explanation for the evident divergences in the path toward modernization. And I'll stop here, because when I read this, and I haven't seen it before, it rang a bell that there's this, difference between how people were almost forced to read and make up their own mind about the Bible and about God. And that's a huge difference that I will come back to. If you go to the lower part of the page, the cultural factors, Swedish society has been influenced by a strong emphasis on egalitarianism individualism and a belief in consensus-based decision-making. The Swedish welfare state has been developed in line with these values. Spain, with its historical heritage of Catholicism and regional diversity, has had a different cultural context. Traditional values, regional identity, and the influence of Catholicism have shaped the country's social and political dynamics. Sorry for the long sentences here, but the point here is that it seems like the difference in the way that Protestantism and Catholics took back many years, even back to the Reformation, but certainly up through the 16th, 17th, and 18th, 19th centuries, has made a huge impact on why and how different countries evolve value-wise. So that is one of the conclusions I came to, which is supported by a lot of other literature, and we will come back to it when I look at the World Values Survey, because there's a lesson to be learned here. I'm of course not saying Protestantism is better than the Catholicism, not at all, but there's a difference. And that difference goes back to Luther, back to his request about people should themselves make up their mind about the Bible and about God. And I've even come to the point that I said a trigger point that finished the blue mean, effectively or terminated the blue mean, was Luther in 1517, when he finally let the ego escape from the captivity. I will come back to that in a second, of the blue mean. I'm just trying to apply some spiral dynamics here. So I will come back to this one. I will come back to these discussions and these points here. When you look at the Nordic countries, 5 Nordic countries have also organized a Nordic Council of Ministers. And the vision for 2030 for the Nordic countries is that the Nordic region will become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world in 2030, driven by a strong platform of, I would say, green mindset, orange-green mindset. And on the next pages, I'm just gonna go through them very fast, but just to document that any index, almost any index, I should say, that any major organization make about this or that topic, you will find the Nordic countries among the 10 largest, or 10, if I may say, best. And I'm not here to brag about the Nordic countries, not at all, but these are facts. So if you look at, for instance, the level of democracy, we have this, the Economist Intelligence Unit that published the democracy index. And if you look at the red square, you see Norway, Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. And again, here, I will repeat that over the next slides. Switzerland and Netherlands are also part of it, which I will also come back to when we look at the World Values Survey. If you look at happiness, ranking the World Happiness Report that they publish once a year, and here are the numbers for 2022. You see there the red square, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Israel, Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway, again, the same cluster of countries. And if you look at the Corruption Perception Index published by Transparency International, again, you find the red square, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Netherlands are there as well, Switzerland are there as well. And if you take the World Bank's publication on corruption, if you look at the red square in the bottom left, you can see that the high scoring, i.e. less corruption or minimal corruption, are among those countries that grew up with Protestantism or Lutheranism. I have just picked out a few more to document what I'm trying to tell. These are from the US News that made a huge report every year on many topics. I've just picked a few here. Quality of life, You see to the left, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. You have Netherlands. You have Switzerland there as well. And on social purpose, without going into the definitions, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Finland. And I guess this is the last documentation. And if you look at trust versus GDP per capita, i.e. trust to each other, trust to the government, trust to the police, and so forth, you will find that these cluster of countries that I just mentioned, the Nordic, Netherlands, Switzerland, are, exclusively alone there, with, of course, US and Canada as well. And this is my friend from the US, Bernie Sanders, American Dream. This is what he kind of told in a speech. I think we should look to countries like Denmark, like Sweden, like Norway, and learn from what they have accomplished for their working people. And I call him a progressive mind. And obviously he's in search for more green than what he has in the US, heavy orange, blue orange, of course some green, west and east coast, but he called for more strong social safety nets, universal health care, affordable education, workers and women's rights, environmental sustainability, and income equality. All beautiful, beautiful green meme qualities. So that's it. I made this slide because over the last approximately 500 years, we have moved from Gutenberg, who made distribution of written documents possible with the printing press, into Luther, who took the fight with the Catholic Church, and his 95 theses in Wittenberg, and his challenge of the indulgences that people had to pay, and into the Swedish lady over to the right, and Fridays for Future with Thunberg. So you see, there is over, and of course, this is a very severe simplification, but nevertheless, Gutenberg was absolutely essential in making it possible to write, distribute information, and Luther, he released the ego from the blue captivity, and we have now a totally different topic among the young people in Scandinavia. Now, what did it mean when Gutenberg, he invented the printing press? Well, if you look at this diagram, you can see that the literacy rate grew dramatically, more in some countries than in others, but clearly Netherlands, I know, was very, very high, maybe the highest in Netherlands, then followed by Sweden and the United Kingdom. But over these 500 years, you can see there's a dramatic increase in the people's ability to read and write. And if you look at the line most to the right, bottom, that's the line for the world. You can see there's still huge differences, even up to the year 1900 and 2015. There's still differences, huge differences. Now, if I bring this into Nordic, and maybe with some specific focus on the Danish development, but not only, there were 4 very important developments, I would call, that help bring the philosophies from French, German philosophers into Denmark and further on into the Nordic. And that was the folk high schools. And basically it's a topic where the farmer boys on the farms were forced on, rather offered, to come into a high school where they got education. And that was driven by the priest Grundtvig. To the left, upper left, you see a picture of Grundtvig, and he was the one that established the high schools, which is still a huge net of schools today that people visit and get training and education. Followed by that, and that was also due to Grundtvig, came the cooperative movement, where small, poor farmers went together and built a lot of cooperatives within slaughterhouses, within milk within beef and so forth. They built those small cooperatives, and that was a huge help to the development of the people at the rural areas. Then in 1871 we had the trade unions. I guess Denmark is, or most Nordic countries have a strong representation, although declining, strong representation on the trade unions. Up to 85-89% of the workers are organized in trade unions. And last but not least, we got this Mathilde Beyer to the bottom left, who forced the women's movement forward. And all these activities, together with those guys here, the authors and writers of around 1900, Denmark, Georg Brandes, who actually made Nietzsche famous through some presentations in Copenhagen. We had August Strindberg from Sweden, and then we have Henrik Ibsen from Norway, that all took or challenged the authoritarian mindset and opened up. So I call them the Scandinavian fathers of the green meme. So the key denominators of this tour de history is that Lutheranism and Bildung has been absolutely essential in the development of the Scandinavian, or I would say Nordic countries, to where they are today, mimetically speaking. And for those who don't know Bildung is in the bottom of the slide, is a German term that refers to the concept of education and personal development. It encompasses the intellectual, moral, and social growth of an individual throughout their life. The term Bildung is often translated as formation in English, or cultivation or self-cultivation in English. So this is basically my take. This is my, given the limited time I have, this is my conclusion, which we will come back and discuss. A few slides on similarities and differences. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. However, more similarities than differences between the Nordic countries. And here is just a brief list of the similarities. The center of gravity in the green meme, although I do see variations, but it's typical welfare states. We have high top marginal tax in all of the Nordic countries. It's, of course, liberal democracies with high social welfare and free healthcare. We have free access to education and a very well-educated population. I guess goes for all of the countries in the cluster that I pointed to several times. Protestantism, and I must admit, I'm myself an atheist, to be honest with you, but we see atheism and secularism is high and increasing, but definitely Protestantism and Lutheranism has been absolutely central in the evolution of the Nordic countries. We have relatively low income equality, high focus on women's LGBT plus rights and gender equality, and high priority on environmental politics, high quality of life, and high levels of trust in what I would call affluent countries. And I hope you all resonate, because I wrote this saying, this is green meme. This is true green meme. Now, the difference in the bottom of the slide is Finland and Iceland are republics. Denmark, Norway, Sweden are monarchies. Norway and Iceland not members of the EU. And there was a huge difference that I would have loved to cover as well, but time won't allow it, about the approach, how we dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. Sweden different from the other Nordic countries, but again, I won't have time to go into that and the reason for that. And then we have Sweden, not a member of NATO yet, and then huge differences on immigration politics and criminality. related to immigration that I will cover on some of my next slides. And here is basically the conclusion, as you can see up to the right, upper right corner. You have the Protestant Europe that have moved further to the right and upwards, which is, I see in the bottom, you can see I have put a green dotted line, blue dotted line, where we see countries over to the left, African, Islamic, typically center of gravity, purple, red, but definitely red. And in our part of the world, it's orange, dominated by orange and green. Of course, it's an oversimplification, but just for the point of understanding what I'm trying to say. So this was the history. This is where we came from. Some of the reasons why we became what we are, and you feel free to disagree completely with me. I'm looking forward to the discussions, but now we're changing the direction. I have a question for you. I have a very important question for you that I'm myself struggling with. The question for me is, are the Nordic countries en route towards implosion? I would go so far as to say that we are right now facing a beta condition that you're familiar with, time of uncertainty, questioning, and frustration, a place of doubts. Something is wrong, but what is it? And we are equipped with brains to the right, upper corner, right. I picked that from Don Beck's first book, Spiral Dynamics. I guess it's page 72, where he warns us, saying that minds under the exclusive control of the red, blue, orange, or green memes, each is convinced it already has the answer. So you see the need here for more kind of verticality, understanding the dynamics of each of the memes and how to facilitate the dynamics. And my take is that we don't have the leadership that can do that for the time being, at least. So the options to the left, bottom left options, as you all know, we can either regress, we can stagnate, or we can progress. That's the situation in Norway. And I will now just document briefly the key factors behind the beta condition, or the route towards implosion, which is, of course, the opposite of explosion. It's kind of a sudden inward collapse, you can say. And very fast, no doubt that immigration provides or is a major threat to the cohesion of the societies in the Nordic countries. Demography, the same, I guess, all over Europe, no secret here. But clearly, there's a major shift in demography also due to immigration. The cost of care, I recall when, and I guess I did 10 seminars in Denmark with Don, I recall that was always his kind of message to us with the green, with regard to the green. The cost of care will come to challenge you. And it's what's happening right now in least our part of the world, in Denmark. This will lead to class of memes and polarization, not just because of immigration, but due to different memes developing in Denmark, the zeitgeist, as we call it. New green kind of qualities emerge and are claiming a space in the public discursive discussion. We have clearly changing work habits among the young people, and the work-private life is absolutely a topic that are being discussed. Not when I was young, it was not a topic. And then we have also changing workforce, i.e. skilled labor shortage. I mean, companies and institutions have difficulties finding enough qualified people. And of course, no surprise to any of you, technology, and especially here over the last maybe 10 years or so, artificial intelligence. On top of that, we see the largest fragmentation among political parties that we have ever seen in Denmark before. 13 different political parties. And I recall the situation in Belgium. I think that when I spoke to Auge, the situation in Holland might be quite similar. But these are some of the factors behind the intensifying, you could call, beta conditions. And with that, I'm done on the Nordic countries and where they came from and why they ended up where they ended up, mimetically speaking. Okay, let's take a look at the Nordic countries and immigration. And again, here I will provide some data, some documentation for what I'm stating. If you look at the number of immigrants in the Nordic countries in the period 2001 to 2021, you can see here, blue line Denmark, black Finland, gray Iceland, Norway and Sweden, Norway red and Sweden green. So there is a tendency that the Swedish people, Sweden has taken a lot, and you can see that here. This is the blue line is Western Europe, how many immigrants Western Europe has taken, and the red line is the share that Sweden has taken. So I have put here, I think that they have taken their fair share of immigrants, but the question from my side as well is at what price for the Swedish society? You all know that this is a hot topic at the EU level, but Sweden claimed to be this humanitarian superpower, but now I guess reality has come to them in terms of the mix of different memes, which I will come back to. Just a few topics here. Over the last couple of years, Sweden have moved to the top of number of fatal shootings. You can see there in less than a decade, Sweden has overtaken Italy and Eastern European countries to have the highest number of fatal shootings in Europe. Bottom left, Sweden's gun violence rate has soared due to gangs, report says. So it's a challenging situation that they are about to tackle, about to discuss. Just a few more slides. Here are bombings in the Swedish town. And this one here, I would like you to read the yellow, which is from Justice Minister Gunnar Strömmer, which Strömmer said Sweden's 60 shooting deaths this year compared to 4 in Norway, 4 in Denmark, and 2 in Finland. The deaths are the tip of an iceberg of violence and organized crime that have put down deep roots in parts of society, Strömmer said, Minister of Justice. And in the bottom, honor, depth, and prestige are serving as the pretext for an increasing number of deadly shootings that challenge the ideals of equality and social harmony on which modern Sweden was built. And let me just make the conclusion. I'm sure you already have realized that we're dealing here with purple red, or most red meme, which I will come back to in a second. Many have said, is Sweden a failed state? Definitely, they have recently taken steps to address the topic. It's a huge topic for them and a huge challenge for them. I would say that Norway, Norway, Denmark, and maybe to a lesser degree, Finland has had similar problems, but they have politically, they have been tackled in a much different way than Sweden has done it. And that has led to Sweden moving into the crime index by country in 2022. You can see Sweden has now become yellow, I'm medium, whereas Norway, Denmark, Finland is green, and Iceland, of course, is green, and which means low crime, generally speaking. Recently, also the Finland's Interior Minister pledges stricter immigration policies, citing a Nordic shift. So, some documentation. This slide shows a shift from Western to non-Western immigrants to Sweden. And you can see by 1970, there were very few from non-Western countries, whereas in 2015, and it has continued, the proportion of non-Western immigrants has increased dramatically, shifting the balance. This is the number of shootings in Sweden from 2017 to 2022. The blue columns show the fatalities, and you can see 62 fatalities in 2022. And these are Danish numbers where we look at the different countries where non-Western immigrants and descendants come from in 2021. You can see Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iran, Somalia, Afghanistan, and all countries having typically a center of gravity in the red meme. This is also for Denmark, again, the crime index, but I don't need to repeat my message. This is the development in immigrants and descendants in Denmark, where the upper line is immigrants, non-Western countries. The brown line below is immigrant Western countries, and then you have descendants from non-Western countries. And you can see there's an upwards trend towards that. Same for Norway. I don't need to go into it. Same pattern. These are perpetrators per 1,000 people in Norway. Old data though. And this one I would just spend 10 seconds on, because you have to look at the black-red columns here, which are the columns documented school and education from those countries where immigrants come from. And you can see that the educational level, it's not a surprise, just to document, is extremely low in most of the countries where immigrants come from, which raises the question, how do we deal with it? Last slide here, Finland. To the right, you have the asylum seekers from 1990 to 2019, Iraq, Somalia, Yugoslavia, and so forth, same picture. So, what went wrong, if anything? And what can and should be done, if anything, is the question. And here's my final slide on this part of my presentation. We are playing a very, very dangerous game of mixing different memes. And I recall from my many seminars with Don, that Don said he has never seen a kind of a clash between green and red where red didn't win. Red will beat green all the time. So my take here is, for discussion, that what the green meme countries need more than ever is second tier. The understanding of this dynamics that this is a very difficult game we are part of, and it's only intensifying. And we should not blame the people to the left. This is not my point. I will blame the lack of understanding how to deal with it. The lack of understanding of the dynamics between memes. Because the way we have, in a very, very, I would say, good intention, with very good intention, have taken and welcomed a lot of the immigrants with a typical green approach, which they are not used to, and we have failed big time in addressing and understanding these dynamics. And I think this is a huge challenge for us. We can discuss that. And then a few slides on Sweden and Finland and their application for membership in NATO. They're giving up their neutrality that they have had for ages. And I can tell you it was tough discussion in both countries, but there was support for it. And why? I mean, I call it, we are moving from the age of globalization, dominant orange, to the age of geopolitics. And the resulting effect of that is, of course, driven by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sweden and Finland has both borders to Russia in the sea level for Sweden. Norway as well has it. Concerns about national safety, security are increasing in the Nordic countries and definitely in Sweden and Finland. And we have seen that Erdogan and Orban are challenging Sweden's membership for political reasons. But the last two sentences is my conclusion that all this has led to increasing levels of anxiety, which will always, I say almost always, lead to regression on the spiral. And it activates deep existential questions about individual and societal survival. And then I have added a funny little thing here, because when I prepared for this session, I looked at these general secretaries of NATO, and I was not aware of this before. I didn't think about it. But over the last 20 years, it has been politicians coming from upper left on the World Value Survey, i.e. Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway. And I guess that, I know they're looking for a new general secretary. I guess Stoltenberg will continue. But the candidates, at least what I've read in the newspapers, have been, Kaja Kallas from Estonia. It has been Mette Frederiksen, Danish Prime Minister. It has been Mark Rutte, I have seen from Netherlands, and then it has been Ben Wallace from the UK. But again, I just wondered. I'm welcoming your opinion about the green meme being General Secretaries of NATO. Now, my last introduction, and I don't want you to read this. Don't worry. But I move now into the topic of science of second tier. I'm very skeptical. But one thing that I would like you to help me with is that I've been speculating a lot about the growing individualism that I see among the, I guess, Nordic youth, which is different than egoism. That's why I put up the differences, but I'm not going to read it. Other than egoism is self-interest, self-centeredness, own self-benefit and self-interest, whereas individualism is about individual rights. It's about autonomy, freedoms, and self-reliance. So I asked myself, is that Teddy Larsen? Is that a sign of yellow, that you see this shift that also the German sociologist Andreas Reckwitz and Hartmut Rosa has discussed in detail in their latest book about postmodernity. So my question is, are we seeing individualism as a sign of second tier? Not for sure, not egocentric, like in the top of the slide, this first tier. But do we see, is it a sign of individualism? Is it a sign of second tier? And the traits of individualistic cultures I have just put up here, slides. It's self-sufficiency, it's uniqueness, it's autonomy, it's independence. So I think I will stop here and leave you with the last slide, which I love. The history of evolution is that life escapes all barriers, painfully, perhaps even dangerously, but life finds a way. And I recall Don always ended his seminars by saying, well, lots of challenges, lots of threats, but ladies and gentlemen, we're still here. And he was damn right. So with this, I will conclude, and I hope I somehow stick to the time Auge.
Well, thank you, Teddy, and that was very much within the planned time. So thank you also for that. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes for some questions. who would,
or points of view.
or point of view? Yeah. Barbara, please.
So, Teddy, what would you say the difference would be between orange individualism and yellow individualism?
Yeah, that's a good question, definitely. I guess the difference might be that the yellow, you asked about the orange and yellow, right?
Right, in the individualism at each level. I mean,
Yeah.
I find
Okay.
orange very individualistic
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, my point on this one, my answer to that would be, when you move up to the second tier, you get this systemic approach and understanding. We normally claim, and I think that's true, that the ego, the strong ego that you have in orange, for instance, disappears. There would be a more interest in survival of the system rather than the survival of the individual. That's nothing new to you, I'm sure, but that's some of the major differences I see, that when you move into second tier, there's a huge shift. And as I've said a couple of times, I'm not sure life conditions are bad enough at the current time here that we see a lot of emerging yellow, but I'm prepared to somebody educate me on that topic, but I'm skeptical.
I am too, Teddy, both in the US and in Europe. Very skeptical that it might be orange among the young, but in the old Luther sense, right? Of darn it, we can interpret this for ourselves. We don't have to be sheeple, but I don't see the systemic sophistication of yellow.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Just a little funny comments. I've done a lot of seminars, biodynamic seminars, and there's a tendency that everyone strive, and rightly so, strive towards second tier. I just want to remind people, at least that's my take, that second tier thinking and behavior doesn't necessarily need to be very pleasant. It could be cynical. It could be tough. It will do what is needed to do for the system to survive. So another point here at seminars, when people approach me and so I say, I believe I have a lot of yellow in me. That's the first sign of the person not having yellow, because that's the ego who speaks. Sorry, but that's just an observation I've done.
Yeah.
Yellow would have to have humility. Is that what you're saying, Teddy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Leida, please.
Yeah. I first want to say, Teddy, that I'm really touched by your story. It's so, I feel it's so to the point. And I really feel challenged to see what we can do with your insights here in the Netherlands. It's so needed, I think. So I want to thank you very much. It's still rumbling in my head and in my body. And maybe for the yellow, I believe somehow in part of the youth, the young people, because they, as I said, like Greta Thunberg, and we have in Holland, we have also the Extinction Rebellion. I think, okay, they see what's happening. And yeah, so maybe there's the start of the change that's needed. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lila. Robert.
Hi, Teddy. Thank you. Very interesting stuff. What was my question? Oh yeah. You were saying, like, I'm not sure if the life conditions are, and I'm paraphrasing here, tough enough for yellow to emerge.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm thinking like, okay, yes, I get that in the sense that life conditions have to be more tough or more complex. If I notice in myself, like trying to grapple with yellow and trying to wrap my head around it and trying to wrap my head about some of the real complexity and also the big issues, I can see that is a kind of like trying to move into that. But my life conditions are very good on a scale from, if you look at the world sitting here on my couch in the Netherlands. But my question is, more challenging life conditions, don't they also lead to regression? And how does this play of dynamics work like this?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, that's what we see. That's why you need enough cognitive capacity among individuals that can actually drive the emergence of yellow. But it will be life conditions that determine whether you will select yellow or not. And you're absolutely right. That's what's happening. The tough life conditions these days, whether we speak about Sweden, Finland, and NATO, or whether we speak about immigration or any other topic, you're absolutely right. When the individuals are being put on pressure and the level of anxiety goes up, and especially anxiety, not fear. There's a huge difference between anxiety and fear. But when the level of anxiety, I don't know what I am afraid of, but I am afraid, goes up, you're absolutely right. We will experience regression. And that's, I guess, is one of the key parameters behind the populistic shift among populations, i.e. over towards populism. People are scared to this. Come and help me, come and save me. The strong man, I can save you. We go for him. Trump, and you can mention many others. Anxiety, driven by anxiety, existential anxiety. That's my take on it. But you're right. Regression will take place. My question to you, back to you and to all the other listeners here is, is there any way we can help facilitate yellow? And it speaks against what I just said, because it will be life conditions that determine. But I'm so anxious to have some more complex thinking on many of the topics that we have in the world. But I'm skeptical.
Okay. Thank you. Ole.
Yeah, thank you, Teddy, for a great presentation, which I also think is quite spot on. The conditions I see in Denmark and the Nordics. I think also there's a misunderstanding of what is actually green, and probably both in the Nordics and in the Netherlands, which I interact a lot with people from there. And I see a lot of what I will call healthy blue and healthy purple in the Netherlands and in the Nordics. People care a lot about their families, and people care a lot about security and trust in the local communities. And what could be seen as green is actually learned as blue. And I'd like you to comment on that, because that would explain why also not that many people move up the spiral as we could expect, and thereby also that what we see as a center of gravity in green might be a little confused.
Yeah, Yeah, I hear you, Ole. Absolutely. I guess to start there, on the green mimetic contour of green in at least Denmark, I think it's the same for Norway and Sweden. Don used to talk about green on steroids. What we are perceiving as, or might be perceiving as, signs of yellow is really green on steroids, kind of extended green, but not true second tier thinking. And coming to your point there, I can only confirm and agree with you that there's a major shift downwards. We see more purple, more blue, for sure. And I call it from globalization to geopolitics. And in that kind of title lies the fact that instead of seeing more liberalism or neoliberalism, I think we will see more strengthening of the blooming, even further down maybe. And I don't know if I answered your question there, Ole, or what is your own point of view about it? Let me ask you that.
My own point of view is, as you might remember, how I filled out your survey, is that we are much lower in the spiral than we believe we are, and that there are so much more learned green than actually lived green out there, and that confuses the view of our population as we see.
Yeah,
I have a slight little hope, let me say that, and I think Leida alluded to it about, and I'm not promoting extension rebellion, but there are movements, there are signs among the youth that things might change. I was a little highlighting some of the tendencies among the Danish youth, at least in terms of work habits and the way you look at work, which is of course a challenge, because if they don't take the jobs that are needed, they don't pay tax, and that will erode the welfare state. We need tax to have the welfare state run. So there are some different factors, but the quality of life aspects are changing from when I was young to when the youth talk about it today.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful also what we see in the big cities like Copenhagen and what we see in the smaller cities in throughout the country. And I'm not seeing especially that much extension rebellion stuff in where I live and I have my usual goings in two of the second biggest cities in Denmark. We don't see that much of extension rebellion characters. They are definitely there, sure,
Yeah.
but I work with a lot of young people.
Can I?
okay. I'm suggesting that we move on to the, because I like to give Nino and Stephanie and Katrina the chance to also ask their questions.
Yeah.
So is there a good point where we take on the points? Thank you, Ole, and we move on. Okay, Nino, please.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. My question relates to the kind of economic aspect of this progression of the Nordic countries and perhaps other more developed economies. I found it was maybe missing a little bit from the story. I'm actually currently reading the Memenomics book, so that's why it's very much on my mind. But could you add some context of economics in this development of the Nordic countries, and perhaps I don't know if you're familiar with work from Jason Hickel, but it's about the global north and global south divide and how these Nordic countries perhaps have leaned into different spirals in different countries and this complexity. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I didn't cover economics a lot. Because of time, I have not digged into it or dug into it during my preparation. All I can say right now, if you look and compare European South to European North, I will go as long as to state that the economies of Northern European countries are strong, pretty strong. There are some exceptions. I know Sweden is struggling these days. Norway, Denmark has very strong economies. And if you compare to the southern part of Europe, again, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just trying to understand that they have been struggling with the economies. And the good question that you raise here about economic aspects would be interesting to look into and compare. And there was this comparison. I have not read in detail the book about comparison of Sweden and Spain, but there are clear differences in the way that the political economical systems are run. But I cannot go into further detail because I don't have the insight to it. But do you yourself have some aspects on points of view on that?
Well, I'm trying to understand it, but I always wonder how much of the growth that was possible in more advanced economies, like maybe the Netherlands or the Nordic countries, how much that was facilitated by leaning on, this is perhaps also a green point of view, by leaning on the resources and work and the global debt system, which I learned from Jason Hickel how that works.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, if I was to make a very short, very simplified answer or comment to that one, we have been fortunate in the Nordic countries, elite, to have healthy blue, Lutheranism again, but healthy blue. Without healthy blue, no healthy orange. Without healthy orange, no healthy green. So it goes back to the way that governmental institutions and the financial institutions have been built. And at least I believe in most of the Nordic countries, the level of trust to government, to governmental institutions have been a major important point in where we are today. But healthy blue for sure. And my question is that, taking a broader picture in the world, of the many failures we have made by just putting a lot of money down to warlords in red mean countries, instead of trying much more foreign policies of building institutions. I know it will take a long time for sure, but that's where it starts. Without healthy blue, no healthy orange, no healthy green. Does it make sense? Yes,
that does help. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. We got two more questions. We're a bit pressed for time, Teddy. So, but I would like to give Stephanie and Katrina a chance. So, if we can do that, the next two questions in about 5 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Stephanie,
Teddy, great. Thank you so much for this valuable information. So I'll be very quick. One, is Sweden still producing armaments and selling them?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one thing that I wanted also to open a shot on. Secondly, this is from my personal experience. I spent quite a lot of time in Sweden. I think there's a difference between people living in cities and people living in rural areas. And there are many people living in rural areas that they're not really reasoning green, but it's more blue reasoning that can look like green. So I think there is quite a difference in life conditions that can make a difference, because some people experience orange on a personal level, some don't. So that could be some insight to look into. And last but not least, I think that respecting laws in Sweden, I think just like in other countries, is a big thing. So sometimes really it's what's creating a lot of turmoil is the fact that many people are not acknowledging these rules and regulations. And this can definitely somehow shake the boat pretty much on both an individual and collective level. So it's still always having to do around the blue meme, I think. And how much is this orange meme really affecting a real green meme or not?
Mhm. Yeah. Let me just emphasize, when we talk about center of gravity green for the Nordic countries, you're pointing to a very important fact, and that is there's a lot of variation in different countries. You're absolute. There's lots of difference between rural areas, same in Denmark, rural and urban areas, where you have clearly much more, I would say, blue-orange in the urban areas, and in the larger cities, you are dominated by the, say, orange-green, but definitely green, and that's where the majority of media and the majority of institutions are placed. So that has an impact on the general public discussion. That's an important point. And I didn't get your questions or point of these rules and regulations. I was not.
It's just an intuition, but I think I would want to look more into detail as to what's making people who didn't feel like making the I meme emerge, whether it's red, orange, or yellow. Why is it arising? So I think looking into more what's happening with people that are not respecting the rules and regulations. So there's like some kind of disrespect towards the nation itself. It's just an intuition. I don't have answers.
Okay. Yeah. And well, maybe just a parallel to what you said here. With many immigrants moving in from Syria, from Afghanistan, and those into Sweden, Denmark, and so forth, let's not forget, for the first, we should not point fingers at these people. It's poor people. It's sad situations. However, they come up here, and the state and the state institutions are the most tough enemies to them. And suddenly they have to make a mind shift towards what we see the state as kind of supporting us, helping us. So there's this major mental class. My recommendation would be that we should actually offer immigrants at least a chance to understand the differences. And as you might recall, Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, said,
yeah,
if you want to move people, you have to meet them where they are.
They are, yeah.
And
Great.
that we have made big mistakes. Big mistakes. Soft green approach instead of trying to understand where they're coming from and relate to their way of doing things.
Well, I think it starts from purple as well, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Good. Okay.
Katarina.
Teddy, so nice to see you. The last time we spoke was, I believe, 27th or 28th of February 2022.
You're right.
And we've just crossed the border with Ukraine, Slovakia after a week in the car. So my question, basically, it's not a question. You asked a question, how to facilitate yellow. And may I share just two ideas? Please. And I'll try to be short. One, I think very good answers and suggestions are presented in Lena Rachel Anderson's book, The Nordic Secret, A European Story of Beauty and Freedom, where she speaks about Bildung and folk high schools and basically presents this key challenge that thanks to this cooperative movement and women's rights movement, and first of all, the Bildung basics, like strategy, let's call it, at the government levels, they could move, speaking with Keegan's terms, the society from socialized mind to self-authoring mind. And unfortunately, they didn't manage to create the infrastructure to move people from the self-authoring mind, which is orange and early green in spiral dynamics terms, I believe, to further, like the self-transforming mind in Keegan's terms, and basically yellow in spiral dynamics terms. And actually, Lena has very interesting ideas on what could be the curriculum of the folk high schools, so that there would be more chances to create this conditions and foundation for this shift. This is one thing. And the second thing that I'm kind of pondering over and would like your opinion on. I think that just as the refugees coming from different countries are facing, and you are facing this gap in consciousness between them and the Nordic people, I think that one of the ways to facilitate the shift towards yellow could be maybe bringing the Nordic elites or young people who are finishing the universities and letting them come and travel, for example, to Ukraine. And which is an interesting phenomenon now. We're trying to get together an event. We tried to do it in October. We had to shift it to the next year. And it's very interesting for us Ukrainians to observe the reactions of people in the Western world, including Nordic countries, around the whole idea of coming to Ukraine. And people know, like, we convey the message that Kyiv is very well protected, Lviv is very well protected. They're best, and thanks to our dear Western partners, we have very good anti-missile defense systems. And yes, you may hear a siren, but there is no damage caused during the past 2 or 3 months. So, at least in these cities, and still people report, even if I would be courageous enough to come, but my relatives have dropped on their knees, begging and praying not to go. Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting phenomena. And I believe that this is also could be part of this education, maybe not going to Syria, but coming to Ukraine as part of Europe, fighting for, like, on the frontier of the change. And basically maybe doing the meaning making that is so important for the world and facilitating important conversations from these frontier places. Facing the true anxiety or fear or whatever, but just really overcoming it in quite comfortable conditions. I just want to emphasize that it's more imaginary fear than the real fear, but still doing this step is an important endeavor. So what do you think about these suggestions?
Well, let me go back to what the famous Graves said, and that I have alluded to or mentioned a couple of times. The life conditions here in our part of the world is not severe or bad enough to help the yellow emerge. Now, your proposal is different. Actually, a very interesting proposal. Honestly speaking, Katarina, I don't think that it will definitely help expand the intellectual horizon, intellectual, capacity, maybe even of people coming to what you're proposing. But as human beings, I think we are only ready if we have the cognitive capacity, for seconds, to change when life is getting real bad. I actually had a slide. The last slide I had on my presentation was about Graves, who said, I don't know if you can read it, this one, we need a new crisis. This is written in 1978, where he said, we will not be able to see enough transition among memes until life conditions change in such a manner that it will come naturally. My personal take on this one as well is that I'm afraid we don't have the cognitive capacity to adjust, i.e. the technology, political situations have accelerated behind our ability to comprehend, which is shocking for myself as well. But I don't see political leadership. I don't see business leadership demonstrating the kind of, say, vertical leadership and mindset that will be needed to deal with this situation. Back to your point, I'm a strong supporter of doing what you're proposing, and I don't know if you discussed this with Lene. I will meet Lene on Monday next week, because, as you know, we have this two institutions, the Nordic Bildung and the Fremvirke, is it called, that we are working within. So complex matters, Katarina, but let me finish off by saying I'm so happy to see you. Last time I saw you was not, wow. To all the others, I called Katarina just a few days after Russia had invaded Ukraine, and it was a very, very tough situation for Vitus and Katarina, and I'm so glad to see your smiling face again.
Good.
Thank you, Teddy. And just to finish, I want to say that Lena will hold European Bildung Days, most probably in Kiev, and we are the co-organizers. So you all are kindly invited. May 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2024.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will be Kiev. There is an alternative city, which is Amsterdam, but we hope that Kiev will be the
Sounds great.
place.